imposing trade sanctions on Australia. Well, for more on this, we can speak to Marina Zhang, who is Associate Professor in Australia-China Relations at the University of Technology in Sydney. She joins us from Canberra. It's great to get you on the programme, Marina. In the first instance, how surprised are you that this visit is actually going ahead, given the friction we've seen between both sides?
Thank you for having me. It's not a surprise. I think it's a concrete step materializing the talks between the two heads of the two nations in Bali last month. But the restoring and stabilizing the relationship is not a simple task in my view, and because Australian-China relationship is never a one-dimensional issue. It sits in the China and the U.S. relationships, and increasingly in the framework of Indo-Pacific security dialogue.
Indeed.
So I'm not surprised.
Professor, just in terms of what each side is hoping to get out of this, as you point out, it's not a simple thing to do to try and ease these relations, such an important relationship. What does Beijing and what does Canberra want out of this?
Well, it's Canberra wants to restore its trade partnership with China to the better terms than in the past 3 years. And the reality is Australian exports to China accounts for 40% of Australians' total exports, and the trade surplus to China accounts for almost 90%. So that is substantial. But on the other hand, Australia's relationship with the U.S. is core and cornerstone to its security and national policies, diplomatic policies. So to maintain such a balance between its ally and its trade partner was okay during the good terms between U.S. and China, but is getting increasingly challenging when U.S. and China are engaged in strategic competition and even confrontation. So how to maintain such a balance is a real test to the government and to the foreign affairs minister.
Well, as you point out, this is a really delicate balance, isn't it, of making sure that the U.S. on the one hand isn't too annoyed, so to speak, by thawing relations between Australia and China. How can Australia go about navigating this difficult time?
Is much tougher. It's much more challenging than 50 years ago when the Labour leader Whitlam first initiated the diplomatic relationship with China. The reason is, well, Australian was relatively independent, but today Australians' interests, national security interests, have been tied with the U.S. And Australians' strategic role in the so-called Quad, the multilateral relationships, including U.S., Japan, Indian, and Australian, is increasing because of its strategic location and also its control of critical minerals, including lithium, which are all very critical to the global effort to combat climate change and energy transfer to the clean energy and so forth.
So given all of the difficulties that you've just talked about in this conversation, what can we expect in sort of the best case scenario from this meeting between China and Australia?
A very good question. I think this is ice-breaking step. And it simplify a concrete step of negotiation and a talk. Where it will lead, I have no idea. But I think for both parties, this is an extremely important and critical relationship. Both parties want this relationship to work. So I hope both parties will work to make this relationship beneficial to both parties.
I appreciate your honest assessment there. Marina Zhang, Associate Professor in Australia-China Relations at the University of Technology in Sydney. Thank you so much for joining us. Well,